With Nintendo's entry into the home console market in 1985, 2D platformers defined the common understanding of video games for many people, spearheaded by Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System. While it was not technically the first 2D platformer ever created, it was the first of its kind, and certainly the most popular. One such precursor was another Nintendo title released for arcades, Donkey Kong. Released in 1981, Donkey Kong sees the player controlling Mario, or Jumpman, who runs, jumps, and climbs through levels in pursuit of the titular primate. The game was a commercial success, and to this day is one of the most celebrated arcade games of all time. That success established a franchise, with the sequel, Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong 3 releasing in 1982 and 1983 respectively. The latter of which was a commercial failure in North America, causing the series to go dormant for over a decade. It wouldn't be until Nintendo's next home console that the company would approach Rareware to develop a game that could rival Sega's Aladdin and its impressive graphics. And of course, the series that was chosen to fulfill that seemingly insurmountable task was Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong Country released in 1994 for the SNES, and quickly became one of the best-selling games of all time up to that point. It reshaped the franchise from a collection of mechanically disparate arcade titles to a fast-paced action platformer series. In a sense, you could say the game was a return to the series' roots, updated for the modern era. The game was praised by fans and critics for its visuals, difficult yet addictive gameplay, music, and captivating atmosphere. Like the Donkey Kong arcade game, DKC spawned its own series, one with its own set of highs, lows, and everything in between. Today, I want to take a look at this series and examine why it has remained one of the best and most unique 2D platform series out there. I want to understand what makes their gameplay click, their level aesthetics so enchanting, and why their damn soundtracks never leave my mind. I also want to understand why the ones who don't reach those same heights, well, don't reach those same heights. For this video, I will be taking a look at the SNES versions of the Rare Trilogy and the Switch ports of the Retro Duology. That means no Donkey Kong Land or GBA port talk, sorry. With all that out of the way, let's jump in. This is a complete series retrospective of Donkey Kong Country. If I were to describe what it feels like to play Donkey Kong Country to somebody who is familiar with the original arcade game, I'd simply show them the opening cinematic. The scene fades in from black, showing Cranky Kong standing on some familiar girders, winding a record player. The music playing is the title theme from the NES version of the arcade Donkey Kong game, which is fitting, because Cranky Kong himself was actually the original Donkey Kong featured in that game. Then, Donkey Kong swings into frame, sporting his fresh redesign. His giant boombox knocks Cranky and his dinky old record player into the void. The revamped title theme comes in full throttle, and the background dissolves to reveal a lush jungle. This intro is a proclamation that Donkey Kong Country is a game unlike anything we've yet seen from this series. Though it features no dialogue, it may as well be shouting, "Buckle up, Grandpa, the future is now." It sets expectations high, with full confidence that it will deliver. The catalyst for this game is that the Kremlings, a race of reptile creatures, have stolen Donkey Kong's treasured pile of bananas. Donkey Kong rescues his best buddy, Diddy Kong, from the inside of a barrel, and the two set out to recover the stolen bananas and bring justice to the Kremlings. Mechanically, you really get the feeling that these guys are a dynamic duo. Donkey is bigger, so he has more weight to his jumps, but he can also kill bigger, more dangerous enemies that Diddy can't as easily. He also has a move that I genuinely didn't even know about until making this video, the hand slap. This allows him to damage nearby enemies and break brittle areas of the ground, which is very useful. Diddy, however, is much quicker, more agile. He's great for when you just want to blitz through a level, or you need to jump to a hard-to-reach platform. Each Kong has their pros and cons, so if you lose one by taking damage, you feel vulnerable no matter who you're missing. They feel like a formidable pair purely in a mechanical sense, which is quite the accomplishment given this game's age. Your two main moves here are your jump and roll. The jump works exactly as you'd expect it to. You can jump across platforms and on top of certain enemies to kill them. The roll is a bit more interesting. This move gives you a way to attack enemies horizontally, and additionally, give you a burst of forward momentum. Attacking multiple enemies with a singular roll will extend the length of the roll, and also increase its speed. This gives the player a great deal of agency over how they experience the game, as long as they have the drive to master it. At a high level, DKC can be an incredibly speedy platformer that requires quick reflexes and precision of the player. But if you're newer, it's perfectly acceptable to take the game at a slower pace and bask in the detailed environments. And given how great this game's levels are, I'd recommend the second approach. To me, the best thing about Donkey Kong Country is its ability to instill any emotion within you. The game is incredibly good at selling you on an atmosphere, whether that be through its visuals, music, or level design, which is impressive given the hardware it released on. DKC still stands as one of the best looking games of its era, but it still manages to balance its style with substance. The first level of the game is Jungle Hijinks, which accustoms you to Donkey Kong's control and physics, but more importantly, introduces the game's setting and musical aesthetic. This level is a pretty typical jungle, but its music really steals the spotlight. DK Island Swing is perhaps the most iconic piece of music this series has produced, and it's easy to understand why. DKC's soundtrack composer, David Wise, was originally tasked to write 3 pieces of demo music for a jungle stage. Those pieces ended up being combined into the final product, and as a result, I feel it is the perfect representation of the level itself. The song begins with ambient cricket chirps and a drum riff, establishing the atmosphere of the level. This portion of the song is meant to accompany your experimentation with the game's controls as you come to grips with them, since this is the first level after all. Soon after, new instruments are introduced into the mix, and with each subsequent one, you feel the song building toward a crescendo. By this point, you'll likely feel pretty confident plowing through the level, and the energy of the song reflects that. The song takes on a much different tone at the halfway point, one that prompts you to slow down and soak in the world. It invites you to reflect on your journey throughout the level, and calms you down as you approach the exit. It's a bit of a palate cleanser for entering the next level, after clearing the second level in a row that plays this song, that is. This game makes a hell of a first impression on you with Jungle Hijinks. It remains a standout level by the end of the game, and it's no wonder DK Island Swing has had such staying power in the broader Nintendo zeitgeist. The game takes on a more tranquil vibe a bit later into the first world in Reptile Rumble. This level takes place inside of a muddy cave, and its music complements it beautifully. This song starts out with a random assortment of instruments fading in and out, with water drops helping to establish the atmosphere. It morphs into something comforting before turning downright eerie in the second half, and then the outro ties it all together. It's a gorgeous song. The level itself teaches you how to use the bouncy tires found across the game, a useful skill to develop for later on. It's over rather quickly, but its mood sticks with you long after you exit. The very next level is the legendary Coral Capers, which houses possibly David Wise's most renowned composition, Aquatic Ambience. Coral Capers is a water level that doesn't feature much in the way of hazards or obstacles, and its naturally slower pace places the focus on that blissful music. The song appears multiple times throughout the game, and every single time I hear it, I find it hard to believe it's even real. They managed to pull this off on 4th generation hardware? Impossible. Aquatic Ambience manages to convey a serene atmosphere while also weaving a catchy melody through your brain that I often find myself humming along to. It's a meditative song that has captured the hearts of millions over the years, mine included, and yet, it might not even be my favorite song in the game. The later worlds in the game introduce these factory levels, which go for an electronic dance vibe musically. It fits in perfectly with the industrial setting, which probably seems highly futuristic to the Kongs. The drums are punchy, the beeping builds anticipation, and then the main melody hits. I mean, come on, this just makes me want to dance. There's also Treetop Rock, which plays in levels that take place in this treehouse village region. It's quite different from anything you'll see and hear throughout the game, and both the song and its accompanying levels have always stuck with me for that reason. The song practically forces you to dart through any level it plays in thanks to its pace, and if you can perfect that degree of speed, it's one of the most satisfying experiences you can have playing this game. Even beyond the music, the visual presentation of this game is off the charts. Rare had pioneered a graphical technique that allowed for high-quality sprites on 16-bit hardware. Essentially, they would create 3D models of characters and environments and compress them, giving them much more detail and realistic movements than any other common approach to animation for games of the era. The end result is quite possibly one of the best-looking games of the 90s. In the level Orangutan Gang, the sun sets over the jungle, casting a purple tinge on the foreground. At the beginning of the stage, you can actually watch the sun dynamically set, changing the color of the sky. This beautiful gradient is present for the majority of your time in this level, and it's always a treat to play through as a result. Bouncy Bonanza is another great one, using a similar lighting effect to convey the darkness of the cave. The red background constantly stands out as elements in the foreground contrast it. You'd be hard-pressed to find a level in this game that is not a visual feast, frankly. The temple stages and their intricately detailed architectural and background elements, the minecart stages and the speed at which they have you move through the level, the entirety of the snow world, I just cannot fathom it. One thing about this game's visual design I really appreciate is the fact that it features no HUD elements. Collecting bananas or extra lives will briefly show your total count on the screen, but that's it. It allows the game to better immerse you as you play, and in a sense contributes to the feeling that DKC is less of a game and more of an interactive world. Donkey Kong Country is one of the most atmospheric platformers I've ever played. I think its atmosphere is both a product of and in spite of its hardware. This game could not be made today in quite the same way it exists here, as the AAA industry has largely abandoned anything short of 3D models and environments in games. The visual style was a compromise between the developers and the SNES's graphical capabilities, and yet, looking at it today, you wouldn't even be able to tell that it had limitations. DKC also alludes to topics like military action, resource extraction, and environmentalism through its level and enemy design. Many Kremlings can be seen in attire evocative of US military gear, and it's established that they invaded DK Island. They set up factories across the region to produce oil, which is about as on the nose as it gets. The story is delivered exclusively through the environments, which really ties the world together and gives the game a sense of cohesion that is simply unrivaled. If I had one complaint about the game, the graphics can sometimes inhibit your perception of level elements. The sprites and backgrounds are so detailed that it isn't always clear where some enemies' hitboxes are. I've had multiple experiences where I've died to something like the Slippas, despite thinking I jumped on them, and being completely bewildered when I lose a life. There are also times when I struggle to make out threats on screen, like the coconuts spit out by the mini Neki enemies. Against some darker backgrounds, it can be difficult to see and thus avoid these projectiles, which can cause frustration. Some people take issue with the screen crunch in this game due to the 4:3 aspect ratio, but I've only ever had issues with it in Slip Slide Ride. I don't know what it is about SNES games, but they consistently have the most slippery ice in any video game I've played. Donkey Kong Country is no exception. Combine that with the large amount of slopes present in this stage, and it can be hard to see what lies in front of you, even if you're close to your destination. The screen crunch doesn't contribute to this level in the way that it does in something like Minecart Carnage, where the entire point is testing your reflexes and making you land precise jumps. It just feels like a bit of an oversight, and one of the few compromises that had to be made to make this game possible. Within these levels, there are tons of secrets to be found, mostly in the form of bonus rooms. Despite there being 67 of these rooms in total, there are only a handful of different challenges in them. Some will ask you to defeat all the enemies within a limited time, others will ask you to collect as many bananas as you can, or they may just have you find the room's exit. The rooms are never all that complex or varied, and for that reason, they receive a lot of criticism from people. Yeah, they could be better, but they've never bothered me all that much. For me, the appeal is simply being rewarded for discovering some secret within a level, and in a game like DKC, I don't care what form that takes. Besides, the rooms are fun enough changes of pace that are over pretty quickly. Maybe I'd feel differently if I sought out all 67 of them, but I've never been much of a completionist with these games. I'm perfectly content just stumbling across them here and there and moving on. Sometimes, these rooms integrate animal buddies, a unique take on the traditional power-up found in many platformers of this era. You may find these guys readily available in some levels, but you'll mostly be unlocking them via these golden animal tokens. Matching 3 of these tokens will warp you to a bonus room where you get to use the animal buddy in question. Donkey Kong Country has 4 controllable animal buddies: Rambi the Rhino, who can bash enemies and break walls; Espresso the Ostrich, who can glide; On Guard the Swordfish, who makes exploring underwater stages quicker and more dangerous for the enemies in your path; and Winky the Frog, who jumps really high. There's also Squawks the Parrot, who carries a light for you in one level, but that's his only appearance. Depending on whatever level you're playing through, animal buddies make traversal easier and secrets more accessible. They add an engaging flair to gameplay anytime they're present, and they truly do feel like an upgrade to your base movement. My favorite would probably be On Guard, due to how much control he gives in those underwater levels. His stab move is also very satisfying to execute. Animal buddies are a creative way to implement a power-up equivalent into DKC, while still maintaining the game's atmospheric cohesion. They each bring something new to the table, and are consistently fun to use no matter where you find them. They're just another excellent addition to this game's formula. Despite the game's bosses being admittedly pretty subpar, the final boss encounter really knocks it out of the park. King K. Rool makes his triumphant debut. You'll do battle on his pirate ship with DK Island visible in the background. Gangplank Galleon plays over the fight, and it establishes a kind of happy-go-lucky vibe, which feels fitting for the first portion of the conflict. K. Rool just throws his crown at you and runs across the ship. His next phase involves cannonballs raining from the sky in between damage windows, and the song shifts into something more rock-inspired to match that change in energy. Soon enough, you'll take him down and the credits roll. Although, something doesn't feel right here. What do you mean Critter did the coloring? There's no way he's that talented. K. Rool gets back on his feet for one last phase. This time, he jumps around the arena at different speeds that will surely trip you up if you're unprepared. But if you stay on your toes and keep attacking him, he'll go down for good. Donkey and Diddy head back to their shack to discover their banana hoard has been rightfully returned, and the Kongs rejoice. Donkey Kong Country is a pretty straightforward platformer in terms of mechanics and level design, but it is nonetheless one of my favorite games to replay. When I think of DKC, my mind immediately goes to the potent atmosphere of virtually every level, and as such, I consider it somewhat of a mood piece. That may sound a bit silly considering that this is fundamentally a game about two monkeys jumping around through a jungle made in 1991, with all the good and bad that entails, but I think that those that have played the game know exactly what I mean. This game's vibes linger in your mind. It forces you to confront those feelings and reflect on them. That is exactly what keeps me coming back. I have a weird fondness for this game, and part of the reason why is something I have difficulty articulating. I was born in the early 2000s, which means I grew up during a time that Donkey Kong wasn't going anywhere. I went into my first playthrough of DKC with that hindsight, and as a result, the game feels like the start of something massive, arguably even more so than the arcade Donkey Kong. DKC is such a simple adventure that promises plenty of potential that would soon be realized just a year after its release. In stark contrast to its predecessor, Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Conquest sets a much darker tone with its intro. A still image depicting Diddy and his girlfriend Dixie Kong is the only visual you get before entering the game. Shadows are cast over their faces, with the only light coming off the gold in the chest they're looking into. Kremlings are crowding behind them, signaling danger. The music here conveys the stakes, and, at least for me, had me concerned about what exactly I'd be getting into. After the events of the first game, Donkey Kong was kidnapped by King K. Rool and brought to the Kremling's Crocodile Isle, and so it's up to Diddy and Dixie to rescue him. Crocodile Isle is essentially a dark, mirrored version of DK Island from the first game. It's got the same level of verticality and whatnot, and the aesthetic change allows for an entirely different take on the first game's natural moodiness. DKC 2 leans into a darker color palette, giving it a distinct feel. Well, at least after clearing the opening stages. The first world takes place on Gangplank Galleon, the final boss arena from DKC 1. It maintains that same upbeat spirit from the first game, making it the perfect testbed for teaching its updated gameplay mechanics. Diddy Kong controls just as he did before, but Dixie brings entirely new moves and physics with her. Although she is slower and less agile than Diddy, the main advantage she has over him is her hair twirl move. This functions as a mid-air glide move, which proves to be invaluable at many points across the game. Neither of them inherit the physical power that Donkey had in the preceding game, which adds a layer of challenge to certain enemy encounters. Those bigger enemies can only be taken down with things like barrels or cannonballs, so that sometimes forces you to be a bit more resourceful. It makes this duo feel vulnerable across the game, adding to the tense atmosphere of Crocodile Isle. DKC 2 just feels like a much quicker and more rigorous platformer than the original, since both characters are smaller and speedier than Donkey was. The other big change is that you can now throw your partner in the air. This allows secret barrels and coins and the like to be more clearly telegraphed, but only really accessible with both Kongs in your party. It's a trade-off I'm more than happy to accept, since I find myself secret hunting much more in DKC 2 than I ever did in the original. The bonus rooms themselves have also underwent a huge revamp, presenting much more varied and engaging challenges than before. These bonus rooms may seem similar to those found in DKC 1 at first glance, but what makes them great in DKC 2 is how they're built around the level you're playing, in terms of both theming and mechanics. Every bonus room has been custom made for the level it's in, maintaining a consistent aesthetic and never asking the exact same thing of you twice. They're almost always in line with what you're doing in the main level. For example, say you're playing through a level involving barrel cannons, where you need to make lots of quick decisions and execute inputs with little room for error. A bonus room in that stage might have you ascend to the top of the room using barrel cannons within 20 seconds. A level featuring a specific animal buddy may test your proficiency with that animal buddy in a bonus room by asking you to defeat a number of enemies or platform with them. It's an extremely refreshing change, and coupled with the clearer telegraphing of secrets, bonus rooms are always a blast to engage with. Back to Gangplank Galleon, Pirate Panic is the game's first level. It's very straightforward, as it's mostly concerned with conveying the basic controls and whatnot. However, it stands as one of my favorite levels in the game, mostly due to the visuals. The beautiful blue water backing the highly detailed pirate ship just does something for me, man. DKC2 really leans into the whole pirate vibe, which helps differentiate it from the original's jungle setting. I also just happen to love pirate aesthetics, so it's a choice that I was happy to see made. The second level of Gangplank Galleon takes you to the top of the ship's sails, asking you to jump across masts and climb ropes. It's a visually striking level that ramps up the challenge quite a bit, and it features one of the game's best tracks to boot. David Wise returns as the game's main composer, and unsurprisingly, he did a bang-up job on this soundtrack. DKC2's soundtrack stands toe-to-toe with the first game, and if you put a gun to my head, I might even say that I prefer this one. Country 1 has high highs, but I find that 2 is more consistent throughout. Though, that isn't to say that it doesn't have exceptionally great tracks, as it certainly does. Red Hot Ride is one of my favorite levels in the game for a lot of reasons. Its gimmick is fun, asking you to control this hot air balloon and weave through enemies while managing your height. Naturally, it's a much slower paced level, which allows you to soak in its chill music. You know, this song makes it easy to forget that you're literally in a place called Crocodile Cauldron. These mine levels crop up quite a bit throughout the game, and they're always standouts due in part to the beautifully rendered backgrounds, the unique challenges they present, but most importantly to me, the incredible music they contain. Mining Melancholy begins with a bunch of disjointed metal clangs, but similarly to DK Island Swing, the song builds up and has an excellent payoff. Even if some of the ice levels can be a bit of a nuisance, I savor the time I spend in them thanks to In a Snowbound Land. The Ratley stages feature a different interpretation of the Gangplank Galleon theme, one that I think I prefer to all the others. It's catchy as hell, and it matches the frenetic energy of Ratley's moveset. If you were to ask me what my favorite song in the game is, my answer would be Forest Interlude. Like Aquatic Ambience, it blows my mind that it is even possible on the Super Nintendo. The beginning of the song has this ethereal quality to it that takes my breath away every time I hear it. The levels it appears in are permanently etched into my brain thanks to it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. World 3 might be my favorite section of the game. It takes place in this swamp biome with a sunken ship in the bayou. The levels have this thick, dark atmosphere that harkens back to the natural environments of the first game, while still fitting in with the rest of Crocodile Isle. However, there's one level that stands out against the rest. Bramble Blast is one of the most iconic levels in the entire Donkey Kong franchise. It is the embodiment of everything great about the country games. It features a beautiful backdrop consisting of a soft blue sky and intricately detailed brambles spanning the entire screen. Its use of exclusively barrel cannons lends it a naturally slower pace and a high level of difficulty. And of course, it has Stickerbush Symphony. Stickerbush Symphony is a song that has transcended DKC2, cementing itself as a standout piece of music in Nintendo's prolific history. This song was actually my introduction to the world of Donkey Kong Country way back in Smash Bros. Brawl's Subspace Emissary, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that experience. Despite not having played Subspace Emissary in over a decade, that Diddy Kong section is one of the few sections of that campaign that I vividly remember. And Stickerbush Symphony is exactly why. It wouldn't be until a long while after that event that I finally sought out the Country series, but remembering that song did play a role in my decision to do so. Stickerbush Symphony is among my favorite songs in the entire DKC series, and subsequently, Bramble Blast is among my favorite levels. Its gameplay and atmosphere are simply captivating. I've already spoken about a couple of my favorite levels when I discussed this game's music, but I'd be remiss to stop there. Donkey Kong Country 2 has some of the best 2D platformer levels I've ever seen, and as much as I wish I could talk about every single one of them, I'll leave it to just the highlights. Target Terror is an excellent evolution of Minecart Madness's concept from DKC 1, asking you to quickly react to switches throughout the level that you need to activate to progress. You're forced to make tons of on-the-fly decisions, giving it that same frantic atmosphere that the minecart levels were known for. The abandoned carnival background is also a great change of scenery, which distinguishes the level even more. Rickety Race is also a lot of fun for similar reasons, except stomping on your opponents just adds to the experience. Castle Crush is one of the greatest final levels in the history of the series. It features a constantly rising floor, functionally making it an auto-scroller. The environment has all kinds of quirks to it, many of which will crush the Kongs if they get caught in between it and the floor. To make matters worse, there is a constant flow of enemies that will test your aptitude with the controls and your decision making. It can be punishing, but conquering this stage is very rewarding. Web Woods is a long, intimidating level that consists of an unsettling amount of bottomless pits. This level has you using the new animal buddy, Squitter, to create web platforms. These platforms will expire quickly, and you can only have a handful of them out at a time, so you need to carefully consider your every move. The slower pace of Squitter's gameplay makes him one of my favorite animal buddies to control, and the thick, atmospheric fog of this level combined with it featuring Forest Interlude makes it a memorable level. Toxic Tower utilizes all three of the new animal buddy's abilities throughout its runtime, while a sea of poisonous liquid fills the castle. The level begins with Rattly, who is essentially the DKC2 version of Winky the Frog, and has you jumping across platforms and on the back of zingers to ascend the tower. Then you turn into Squawks, who makes his playable debut in this game after having appeared in the first Country title. Squawks is a lot of fun to play as, even if in my opinion, his gameplay is the most difficult of all the animal buddies. He flies around the level, dodging hazards and spitting eggs at enemies. The trouble I have with controlling him is that he accelerates quickly, which can be tough to handle in particularly tight spaces. You need to tap the jump button to make him flap his wings, which can give him too much vertical momentum sometimes. But striking that balance is exactly what I like about him. I always need to dedicate maximum focus toward clearing any level he's in. Toxic Tower wraps up with Squitter, who is just as fun to control as ever. This level does an excellent job at challenging you with each animal buddy it stars, and its oppressive atmosphere is engrossing. Crockhead Clamor facilitates this wonderful flow state with its main gimmick, the crocodiles that launch you into the air. The way this level is designed reminds me of levels from the first game, that encourage you to fly through them as fast as you can. And I always challenge myself to do that very same thing in this stage's second half. Couple that with a believable environment with a thick atmosphere, and you've got one of my favorite levels in the game. Windy Well may be the best mine level in the game. It brings the wind gimmick from prior levels with it, altering it to blow the Kongs upward rather than side to side. It toys with your instinct to jump over hazards, forcing you to think multiple steps ahead. The way the wind alters the Kong's physics creates some one-of-a-kind challenges, and I enjoy it a lot as a result. There are so many other levels I'd love to discuss, like Animal Antics, Hornet Hole, and Chain Link Chamber, but I think you get the idea. DKC2 has some of the most consistently impressive levels I've ever seen in a platformer. Never mind one from this era. Basically every single level throws some completely new idea at you, and as a result, the game moves at a consistently fast pace. I find these levels a lot more memorable than most of the levels in the first game thanks to their gimmicks, and my appreciation of them growing with every revisit. Donkey Kong Country 2 is an absolute triumph of game design, and one of my favorite games in Nintendo's catalog. If you do decide to seek out all 75 Creme Coins across the game, you'll unlock the entirety of the Lost World, this game's bonus world. The Lost World features by far the toughest challenges you've yet faced. It's a fantastic reward for tracking down every collectible, and solidifies the heaps of praise I've thrown at the game. While I wouldn't say any of the bosses are phenomenal, they're still miles better than the ones in Country 1. I actually had some trouble against Cudgel in this playthrough, and I welcomed that. It's very easy for him to catch you off guard if you aren't prepared. Cleaver in World 2 is a really cool concept, even if it isn't a very difficult fight. The first fight against Crow may be pretty straightforward, but his return in World 5 makes for a much more climactic battle. You have to ascend the ship's mast and dodge attacks from his eggs, which can be pretty tricky. The dark, rainy background makes for a nice tone setter as well. I really hate King Zing Sting, however. His flight pattern may be incredibly obvious, but the Stinger's hitbox is tiny, and I constantly have trouble with him when you combine that with the fact that you're controlling Squawks. The final fight against K. Rool is my favorite of the bunch though. He completes the whole pirate aesthetic the game's got going on, and I love how varied his attacks are. He can apply all kinds of effects to the Kongs, like freezing them or inverting your controls for a short time. He's just as satisfying to defeat as ever. With his defeat, you rescue Donkey Kong, and the adventure comes to an end. Overall, Donkey Kong Country 2 maintains everything I adored about the first game, and improves on everything else. It has a strong atmosphere thanks to both its visuals and its soundtrack. It is distinct from its predecessor in only positive ways. It has fantastic level gimmicks and secrets to discover, and it's more challenging. I believe it to be one of the best platformers ever made, and out of all the games in this series, it's the one I find myself revisiting the most. Rare were on one hell of a run with this series. In the span of only 1 year, they put out 2 of the generation's best games. But Nintendo's next console was just around the corner, and as one of the company's closest development partners, Rare's focus shifted. However, thanks to the success of DKC2, a third entry was greenlit. Some staff who had worked on the first 2 entries continued to work on this new installment, but many of the developers for this game were new to the series. Additionally, David Wise did not return as the main composer for the game's soundtrack, instead passing the torch to Evelyn Novakovic, who had contributed 7 tracks to the original Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, released on November 18, 1996, nearly 2 months after the commercial debut of the Nintendo 64 in North America. While it was critically acclaimed and sold over 3.5 million units, and even retrospective looks of the game tend to be quite positive, DKC3 is often cited as the weakest link in the trilogy, and that's assuming it's even included in the discourse. A lot of people just neglect to mention this game, which has always puzzled me. So, what happened? I don't think even DKC3's biggest defenders would argue against it being considered a black sheep when compared to the first 2 titles. Dixie Kong takes center stage, alongside Kiddy Kong, a character introduced in this game, making this the first time in the series neither Donkey or Diddy Kong are playable. Despite the game possibly being the best looking in the series up to this point, it concerns itself very little with establishing a cohesive atmosphere or setting. Levels lean into the development of gimmicks more so than even DKC 2. Novakovic's music differs in tone from the previous games, lending the game an almost cartoony feel. There's even a fully fleshed out world map, teeming with things to discover, and even allowing you to complete certain worlds in different orders every playthrough. In spite of how it differs from Country 1 and 2, this game still has its fans, much of whom consider it their favorite of the SNES games. I have always found the gulf in opinions on this game fascinating. While I certainly don't think it's a bad game, it is pretty easily my least favorite of the three. I've only ever played it one time before making this video, and I have never experienced a desire to replay it. But simultaneously, I think there's merit to the ways in which it shakes up the formula. Criticism of this game can often devolve into pretty brain-dead arguments, which I will try to avoid by hopefully injecting a bit more nuance into the discussion. Like Diddy before her, Dixie takes on the mantle in this latest installment. Donkey and Diddy Kong have suddenly gone missing while exploring the northern Cremasphere, and she sets out to find them, along with her little cousin, Kiddy Kong. I'll cut to the chase here, this story setup is kind of lame. It worked in DKC 2 not only because it was the first time it was done, but also the dynamic was different. Diddy Kong needed to step up to bat when K. Rool kidnapped Donkey, and in doing so, he proved himself as a capable adventurer. It felt like Dixie was more or less along for the ride in support of Diddy. I think Dixie's relative lack of a stake in the conflict of DKC 2 kind of underscores this game's ability to make that same point with Dixie, no matter how much it may want to. There is something to be said about the subtext of Dixie and Kiddy's relationship in this game, Dixie being a woman burdened with taking care of a child, despite her own aspirations. Check out this great video by Transparency for more on that. But ultimately, the rehashing of almost exactly the same premise as 2 takes the wind out of its sails for me. You could argue the absurdity of both Kongs going missing after the events of 2 was intentional and enjoyable in its own way, contributing to that lighthearted tone I brought up earlier, but it doesn't work for me personally. It's clear that our ultimate goal is rescuing Donkey and Diddy, and it's clear that the final boss is going to be K. Rool. It's not particularly compelling or interesting, which is a shame. At the end of the day, it's not a massive deal, because it isn't like these games' stories are an integral part of their appeal. I just would have liked to see Rare broaden their horizons with Dixie. Dixie Kong returns unaltered from DKC 2 in terms of her movement and abilities. She's still got that busted hair twirl move, and she can still throw and be thrown. Kiddy Kong is where the discourse surrounding this game gets, we'll say, complicated? For a variety of reasons, some beyond my comprehension, many people do not vibe with this character. In fact, I'd name him as this game's single most divisive element, with takes ranging from unabashed love to, ironically, loud, angry monkey noises. We'll start with the low-hanging fruit, his design. Kiddy Kong is a 3-year-old gorilla in a blue onesie with a pacifier around his neck. I think his design is inoffensive and maybe even kind of cute, but some gamers find it ill-fitting of a platforming mascot. I'm not sure if it's a pride thing or a genuine distaste for the intricacies of his appearance or what, but a lot of people will just straight up dismiss him off this alone. I say, open your mind a bit. I'm going to combine these next 2 points because their intersection is where I start to have issues with this character, and those are his personality and his abilities. You're introduced to Kiddy by Funky Kong, who asks Dixie to watch over him, and explains that she may find him useful on her quest, all while Kiddy sits on his ass, looking like he doesn't have a single thought flowing through his mind. What Kiddy brings to the table in terms of abilities is similar to what Donkey offered in DKC 1, but he can also be thrown in the air and break brittle areas of the ground. Additionally, he can bounce on water, which is much faster than swimming, but there aren't as many opportunities to apply this move. Overall, sounds pretty useful, right? Well, some argue that he should have just been replaced by Donkey Kong, since they provide almost the same utility, and Donkey Kong is much cooler anyway. I disagree with this. Kiddy Kong is a worthy inclusion in terms of his unique abilities, as it wouldn't have made much sense for DK to just suddenly be able to bounce on water and get launched into the air to break things beneath him if he couldn't do that before. Besides, I admittedly do enjoy the context in which we meet Kiddy, and when I have the patience for it, his antics can be entertaining. The thing is though, I find Kiddy draining my patience for him pretty quickly every time I play. Generally, Kiddy Kong feels incredibly cumbersome to control and work around, and the game almost implies that that is due to his personality rather than a product of his size. Whenever characters would idle in the past 2 games, they'd usually juggle, blow some bubblegum, or just kinda hang out, waiting for you to move them. But in Kiddy's case, he plops himself on the ground with that same stupid expression he had back at the rental shop. Just get off your ass and move already. For whatever reason, I have a lot more trouble swapping characters in DKC3 than I ever did in 2. At first, I thought it just couldn't be done while Kiddy was sitting, but that wasn't it. It just seems to be inconsistent, and I'm frankly not sure why. There are tons of moments in my footage where I'm just awkwardly sitting next to a secret or something, fighting against the game just to swap characters. I don't know if this is actually the case or not, but the controls in general feel sluggish when compared to the past 2 games. It's entirely possible that it's just a result of Diddy's absence, since he is the fastest character, but I've heard others note it as well, so I thought I'd mention it. Kiddy's difference in weight introduces another issue that is exclusive to this game regarding throwing. In DKC2, Diddy and Dixie were on relatively equal footing, and thus were able to throw each other exactly the same distance. In 3, however, Dixie can hardly handle Kiddy's weight, which changes the arc he's thrown at. Dixie throwing Kiddy is useful only in situations where you need to break parts of the ground, while Kiddy throwing Dixie is used for reaching higher platforms and the like. Each setup has a specific application, something that was never an issue in DKC2. On paper, this sounds like a great way to make sure each Kong is used equally by giving them unique characteristics, but in practice, it slows the game's pace down, and as a result, I prefer how 2 handled things with its more uniform system. This duo feels like they have zero chemistry, which is understandable given the age difference and the scenario Dixie finds herself in, being a reluctant babysitter, and in a sense, I can appreciate the translation of that into the gameplay. That said, it's hard not to resent this guy after a few mishaps, since you as the player live and die by your ability to maneuver through hazards in a platformer. Kiddy Kong just carries this unconcerned attitude with him throughout the adventure, like he barely even knows what's going on. So, while Kiddy Kong doesn't exactly elicit a murderous rage from me at the mere sight of him, he's pretty easily my least favorite of the Kongs thus far. People definitely go overboard with hating on him, even if the best defense of him I can muster is mere indifference. Kiddy Kong may be controversial, but he isn't the sole reason people have a somewhat negative perception of DKC3. The game's opening levels leave something to be desired. Lakeside Limbo is the very first level, and while I wouldn't call it bad, it fails to leave any kind of lasting impression. Jungle Hijinks from the original game is a total walk in the park, but what makes it interesting is its setting, a rich jungle with so much care imbued into every little detail. Every obstacle on your path feels natural, and it effortlessly immerses you in its world. Pirate Panic in DKC2 has a strong commitment to its theme, it teaches you everything you need to know about the game's mechanics, old and new, and throws plenty of hazards at you along the way. Lakeside Limbo feels underwhelming by comparison. Off the top of my head, I remember the background elements being really pretty, and I do like this level's music quite a bit, but not much else stands out. It's a straightforward dash to the right with little else of interest happening. The next level has this wooden shed aesthetic to it, and in terms of design, previews more or less what to expect from the rest of this game's levels. More than any of the previous games, DKC3's levels commit to a central gimmick throughout their runtime, establishing it, fleshing it out, and then finally, testing you on it. In this case, the levels revolve around doors that you need to open with these switches in the ceiling. Once again, this level isn't bad, but this wooden shed theme pops up 2 levels later in what is commonly referred to as one of the worst levels in the trilogy, and then again as the 3rd level in World 2. People aren't hot on this level theme, and while I do find myself missing the naturalistic scenery from some of the other levels, I don't hate this one. It absolutely appears too often in the beginning of the game though, and the funny thing is that the mouse level in World 2 is its final appearance in the entire game. In World 1, there's another lakeside level, an extremely basic and forgettable snow level, and a goofy boss fight against a barrel with a mouth. World 2 establishes some new settings, but it is quick to reuse those as well. So even though design-wise they're better than the earlier levels, they don't stick with you long term. Thankfully, it's after the second boss fight that this game really picks up, and this is where my criticisms of this game mostly end. If you drop the game sometime before beating World 2, I wouldn't blame you. But from here on out, DKC3 is a consistently enjoyable 2D platforming romp with so many levels that are far ahead of their time. I talked about the game's design philosophy, focusing mostly on level-specific gimmicks, which is straight out of the Mario playbook. In fact, I'd even say it outdoes the likes of Super Mario World in creating memorable, engaging premises, and that's not even including the unique strengths that the Donkey Kong Country games bring to the table. Beating Eric in World 2 yields a fork in the road, a first for this series. I started with Mykonos, because it being an island interested me, so we'll begin there. Immediately, this world smacks you across the face with Fireball Frenzy, where these robot owls shoot fireballs at you from the background of the level, and you'll have to balance your positioning with the timing of them entering the foreground. Great level. Then there's Demolition Drain Pipe, asking you to ride a toboggan through a tight pipe, much like the minecart and roller coaster stages from the last games. There's railing that you can grip onto at the top of the stage, adding an entirely new layer of verticality to these levels. This gameplay style is just as frantic as ever, and this variant kicks ass. Next is Ripsaw Rage, where you chaotically ascend a tree, evading a saw as it cuts upward. This might be my favorite way I've ever seen an auto-scroller contextualize in a game, and it's one of the most memorable levels in this trilogy. After that comes Blazing Bazookas, where you bounce on barrels being shot out of cannons by Kremlings. There are these switches throughout the level that you need to find and activate to safely bounce across the barrels, and Squitter makes his anticipated return. Finally, there's Low G Labyrinth, another pipe level filled with this gas that lowers gravity. This world does not miss on a single stage. They all have fun gimmicks on offer. Around here is where the game starts to ramp up and challenge, and they each contribute to the world's central theme, that being a factory. It's probably the most cohesive this game gets, and I think it represents DKC3 at its best. The levels continue their winning streak throughout the game though, with creative idea after creative idea. Cotton Top Cove introduces the Waterfall and Coral Cave level themes, which are some of my favorites. The coral levels might just be the prettiest levels in this game. They have such an incredible amount of detail in them, and the colors just pop out of the screen. While DKC1 expressed the tranquility of the ocean with aquatic ambience, the music of DKC3's water levels is downright terrifying. Waterworld really conveys the boundless abyss, the feeling that something just out of sight is pursuing you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It truly feels like you're swimming in uncharted territory, and Waterworld is a highlight of the soundtrack as a result. DKC3's soundtrack gets a lot of flack, in part because of its easygoing, bouncy vibes, but also for not being catchy or atmospheric enough. I can understand the criticism regarding the former point, but I absolutely do not agree with the latter. There's a sentiment I've heard quite often online. Something along the lines of, Evelyn Novakovic doesn't understand Donkey Kong Country. And even if you think this soundtrack doesn't capture any of what the first two games had going on, that is flatly wrong. Novakovic worked closely with Wise on the original soundtrack, with about a quarter of the songs being credited to her. She was the mastermind behind the Overworld theme, Simian Segway, the Forest Village's Treetop Rock, and perhaps most importantly, the sex icon Candy's theme. Once again, I think this is a case of the game making a poor first impression. And that's not to say the songs on the first world are bad, far from it. These tracks are the ones that happen to differ the most from the previous soundtracks, in a way that I quite enjoy. Stilt Village immediately charms you with its catchy horn melody and dynamic xylophone riffs. Mill Fever is more low-key, but with engrossing instrumentation all the same. And Frosty Frolics evokes a desolate, snowy valley, much like the level it features in. These are all pretty good songs, but they're nowhere near the best on offer here. There's Nuts and Bolts and Mechanos, with its hard-hitting drum beat and synth riff. Hot Pursuit with its utterly chaotic rhythm. And Rockface Rumble with its incredible electric guitar solo. As I was playing, I found myself surprised by how much I was enjoying the music, given its reputation. It may not sound quite like the games that came before, but the ways in which it carves its own path makes sense for this game. After all, there's the whole mechanized enemy thing going on, which aligns with the soundtrack's heavy use of synths and whatnot. In this case, it makes sense to move away from the more naturalistic ambience of the last games, even if I may ultimately prefer that direction. I will say, nothing in this soundtrack delivered an experience like hearing Aquatic Ambience or Stickerbush Symphony for the first time, but the closest it came was Cascade Capers. This song accompanies the waterfall levels, and they're the ones that consistently stick out in my mind when I think of DKC 3. Due mostly to this song. I love how you can hear the waterfall hitting the ground in the background of it as well. Such a cool detail. So, while this soundtrack gets a lot of undue hate in my eyes, it's still my least favorite of the three. In isolation, it's fantastic, but unfortunately, it's being compared against some of the best soundtracks in the medium. Before you comment, I am aware that David Wise composed essentially a new soundtrack for the Game Boy Advance. And yeah, it's great. Discussion of that is a bit beyond the scope of this video, but if you're unfamiliar, I'd recommend giving those tracks a listen. Donkey Kong Country 3 brings back many familiar animal buddies, including On Guard, Squitter, and Squawks. Controversially, Rare removed Rambi, and in his place, added Ellie the Elephant and Perry the Parallel Bird. Like many of the other elements of this game, Ellie is introduced in a pretty frustrating way, but is redeemed later on in the game. The first stage she's fully featured in is Murky Mill, where you navigate through a dimly lit mill brimming with mice, which Ellie is terrified of. As soon as she catches a glimpse of one, she books it in the opposite direction. You'll need to dispose of the mice by hitting them with barrels. I kinda get the complaints with this level, since it isn't like carrying barrels is something only Ellie can do. Any of the Kongs could. And they don't have an irrational fear of mice either. It makes Ellie feel more like a hindrance than an upgrade, which is the point, mind you, but it doesn't make actually playing the level easier to stomach. Regardless, I don't hate this level or anything, but I wouldn't argue with you if you do. Frankly, I find Ellie adorable, and I'd play any level with her in it. Luckily, the levels she returns in shortly after are much more fun. The next one teaches you that Ellie can bring barrels closer to her with her trunk and shoot water out of it. Her fear of mice is utilized in a completely new and I think much more enjoyable way in Stampede Sprint, where she sees a group of mice at the start of the level and runs at speeds that would rival Sonic the Hedgehog. Ellie definitely justifies her inclusion, and she solidifies herself as one of the best animal buddies in the series by the time you've raised the flag on every level. It's just a shame things start off on the wrong foot. Perry the parallel bird is more of a supporting animal buddy. He doesn't give the Kongs any new abilities, he just hovers over you as you run through the level. Once you grab him, it's your job to keep him alive by dodging obstacles that lie in both your path and his, as he often grants rewards like bonus barrels or coins if you bring him to the end of the level. He's a cool addition, just not super groundbreaking. On the topic of bonus rooms, they're mostly the same as they were in DKC 2, with one new minigame introduced. This one sees you grabbing a number of these green bananas in a certain period of time, and the bananas will pop up in random locations, and disappear shortly thereafter. It can either be very easy or very frustrating depending on the pattern you get, since it is completely randomized, so I wouldn't call it a great minigame. Other than that, the bonus rooms themselves are still just as fun as ever to play through. However, I find them much easier to uncover inside of the levels than in DKC 2, which I don't enjoy as much. As I said before, I tend not to play these games with a completionist mindset, but I do like discovering a well-hidden secret from time to time. DKC 3 didn't give me many moments like that, so the bonus rooms weren't as exciting as they could have been. Because of that, I think I'd be far more inclined to 100% DKC 2 than 3 on any given day. Finally, there are the bosses, which are a step up from the previous two games in spectacle, but not so much in difficulty. Squirt might hold the record for the easiest boss in the trilogy, Barbos has you aiming his projectiles back at him to make him vulnerable, and Chaos has you timing precise jumps to reach his head. They're all pretty basic, but they're fine. My favorite is definitely Bleak the Snowman, who you fight exclusively with snowballs. He maneuvers through the background and foreground often, requiring quick reactions from you. In between phases, he'll shoot out big snowballs in tricky patterns that you need to dodge. Really, I enjoy that they adapted the ball throwing minigame from Swanky's tent into a boss fight. I think that's super creative. K. Rool returns as the final boss in his easiest iteration yet. He flies back and forth with a little propeller pack, and you need to knock him down into the electric current with barrels that you need to make spawn. It doesn't ask a lot of you, and the mechanics are simple enough to where he doesn't pose much of a threat. After he goes down, Donkey and Diddy are saved, and the credits roll. Like I've said in about 4 different ways so far, Donkey Kong Country 3 is not a bad game. It is a great game that charts its own course, and happens to stumble a bit along the way. The mostly new team behind this game clearly valued different aspects of DKC than many others do, or perhaps they just wanted to experiment a bit. The levels may escalate in complexity a little slower than I would have liked, and mostly forsake the speediness of the prior titles, but they work incredibly well as more traditional platforming experiences. The soundtrack's tone may lack that contemplative ambience I love about its predecessors, but it is unmistakably unique to this game, and compelling in its own way. At its core, it is a worthy follow-up to Donkey Kong Country 2, one that I think deserves more respect. Donkey Kong Country 3 was essentially Rare's curtain call on the SNES. The Nintendo 64 was in its infancy, and it was all hands on deck when it came to developing games for the console. Between the development of games like GoldenEye 007 and Banjo-Kazooie, the Game Boy received the Donkey Kong Land series of games, but it wouldn't be until 1999 that Donkey Kong hit the N64 with Donkey Kong 64.
Here we go.
This was the era of 3D, so a new Donkey Kong Country was out of the question. Still, Donkey Kong 64's characters and location were informed pretty much entirely by that series, even if the gameplay differed drastically. In spite of that, the game performed pretty well commercially, and Rare greenlit even more Donkey Kong projects for release in the near future. a sequel to the N64's Diddy Kong Racing titled Donkey Kong Racing was in development, along with Diddy Kong Pilot and a game called Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers. However, these games never saw the light of day. The N64 was not yielding the same success as the Super Nintendo, and the GameCube wasn't looking any more promising. Rare was looking to be acquired, be it by Nintendo or somebody else. At the time, Nintendo owned 49% of the company's shares, and yet, in September 2002, Microsoft purchased Rare for $375 million, and Nintendo just let them, with no pushback or counteroffer or anything. Peter MacDougall, Nintendo of America's executive vice president of marketing at the time, had this to say on the matter.
Nintendo had the ability to continue its exclusive relationship with Rare, but in looking at the company's recent track record, its value to the future of Nintendo would be limited. In other words, we passed on this opportunity for very good business reasons.
For whatever reason, Nintendo no longer saw it fit to collaborate with Rare. That meant that Donkey Kong no longer had a studio to call home. From here, the franchise went through a weird patch. Donkey Kong only ever appeared in Mario spin-off games like Smash Bros., Mario Kart, and Mario Party. In 2003, Donkey Konga released for the GameCube, marking the first Donkey Kong franchise spin-off since Rare's acquisition. Donkey Konga is a rhythm game that is controlled by banging your hands on these bongos. It's a pretty silly game, but surprisingly, it was a decent success, which spawned 2 sequels in the following years. Donkey Kong Jungle Beat released in 2004, which is a more traditional platformer in terms of level design, though it is also controlled with the DK bongos. The game flew under the radar, most likely a product of the GameCube's relative failure and the gimmicky perception of the DK bongos. Though, contemporary looks at the game have been pretty favorable, and I'd love to give it a proper shot one of these days. Throughout the rest of the 2000s, Donkey Kong spin-off games were releasing faster than you could play them. There were the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, a smaller scope puzzle series originally conceived as a successor to the Game Boy Donkey Kong, DK King of Swing and Jungle Climber, a racing game called Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, along with a DS port of Diddy Kong Racing. Nintendo likely wasn't sure what direction to take the character in going forward, and they just threw ideas at the wall to see what stuck. It's not like these games were all bad either. In many cases, they were modest successes. Though, they failed to make the same splash that Donkey Kong Country had. In 2008, Shigeru Miyamoto floated the idea of bringing back Donkey Kong Country. A true, no compromises return to form. Retro Studios had recently wrapped up development of Metroid Prime 3, so naturally, they were tasked with the project. Development was a tumultuous process, with the game really taking shape just months before the deadline. In the end, Donkey Kong Country Returns released on November 21st, 2010 in North America, to critical acclaim. Donkey Kong Country Returns is essentially a reimagining of DKC-1 for the 7th generation of consoles. A more polished art style, more spectacular levels, and some updated mechanics that cater to modern sensibilities. The game takes place on DK Island, where a mysterious race of instrument creatures known as the Tiki Tak tribe begin wreaking havoc. The Tikis hypnotize the wildlife of DK Island with an entrancing melody, turning them into their minions. Donkey and Diddy Kong notice the animals stealing from their banana horde when a Tiki breaks into their house and attempts to cast the spell on Donkey, but it turns out he's immune to it. From there, the Kongs set out to defeat the mastermind behind the operation and take back their banana horde. Overall, I like this game's setup a fair bit. It may boil down to the Kong's bananas have gone missing, like DKC-1, but there are some extra layers in the mix that make it slightly more interesting. Nobody's been kidnapped, and K. Rool isn't the figure orchestrating everything, so it gets a thumbs up from me. With 2.5 console generations passing between entries, the gameplay of DKC has been reworked substantially. For starters, Donkey Kong's movement has been overhauled. He's much faster than he ever was in the original, and his roll lasts much longer. Key moves like the ground slam and the roll jump remain intact, but it still feels like you're controlling a completely different character. The screen is pretty zoomed out to compensate, and that allows for a host of new level concepts to test the updated movement. The way he handles has this loose quality to it that takes some getting used to, especially if you're accustomed to the SNES games, but once you get the hang of it, it feels great. Diddy Kong returns as the partner character, although he functions completely differently than in the Rare games. Diddy no longer runs alongside you, rather he sits on your back and gives you access to his jetpack, which allows you to glide for a bit and correct for jumps in midair. Additionally, he adds 2 extra hearts to your health bar, making for a total of 4 hit points. He also unlocks a move called the Kong Roll, which is basically a more powerful, continuous roll that Donkey can perform. This setup also means that you can no longer throw your partner to reach higher platforms and secrets like in DKC 2 and 3. I am mostly a fan of this change. It maintains the majority of the benefits of the trilogy setup while reducing on-screen clutter and streamlines the act of platforming. Though, I do sometimes find myself missing having a partner trailing behind you as you jump and swing around, since no other platformers have anything like it. Not really a knock against this game, just kind of an arbitrary preference I have. Something I will knock the game for, however, is how they've changed animal buddies. Donkey Kong Country Returns has just 2 animal buddies, both of whom appeared in the SNES games, Rambi and Squawks. Rambi functions just as he did in DKC 1, though his jump has been nerfed. He doesn't go nearly as high as Donkey, but he makes up for it with the speed in which you can pummel through enemies. He only appears in a total of 4 levels though, so even his inclusion feels like protocol. We've gotta have Rambi, he's the quintessential animal buddy, right? I never felt like there was an evolution of his gameplay from the SNES games, rather, he's just here to make Returns more familiar and evoke some nostalgia. If anything, he kinda feels worse here. He doesn't have that charge move he had added to his kit in DKC 2. An addition I felt was essential to making Rambi the superstar that he is. He doesn't sprint for very long, so I constantly have to tap the attack button, which can get tiring. Squawks, on the other hand, has a completely different use case. Before, he would carry the Kongs through levels, introducing an entirely new set of physics to contend with. Here though, he's an item that you purchase from Cranky's shop. When purchased, he will alert you when you're near a puzzle piece collectible within a level. I don't have an issue with this mechanic, it's just disappointing that this is all that Squawks' presence in this game amounts to. The treatment of animal buddies reflects the broader design philosophy of Donkey Kong Country Returns. A stripped-back, no-nonsense platformer that anybody can enjoy. There is no denying that Returns is a well-designed game. It has some of the most impressive and challenging 2D platform levels I've ever played through, but it has this sanitized, derivative feeling that permeates the entire experience, and it's why I've never been able to fully connect with this game. Donkey Kong Country has always taken cues from 2D Mario games, but it feels like Returns does it more than any other entry in the series, instead of playing to the strengths of DKC. Returns has 8 worlds in the main campaign, while the SNES trilogy had 6 to 7 each, making a replay more of a commitment. The worlds are a DKC take on basic biomes and themes, like caves, beaches, forests, etc. A far cry from places like Crazy Kremland and Mykonos. The levels themselves are a lot longer, and much like DKC 3, revolve around unique gimmicks to shake up the gameplay. The art style, while clean and good in its own right, doesn't capture the detail and mood present in those original games. Perhaps it is unfair to Returns to unfavorably compare it to a trilogy of games who revolutionized 2D graphics, but that is a critical part of their identity, and it's part of what makes those games so special. The soundtrack mostly consists of remixes of songs from the first game, and practically none of the tracks do enough to stand out on their own merits. It is these changes that remind me why I traditionally have not gelled with 2D Mario games, which explains my lack of connection to Returns as well. Returns is a safe as can be distilling of the DKC formula that opts to jerk itself off over the series past instead of pushing it forward, which is why it struggles to stand out in my memory after the credits roll. Quite possibly this game's biggest sin is its handling of bonus rooms. Instead of the creative, specifically curated minigames found in every room, Returns' bonus rooms ask you to simply collect all the bananas, banana tokens, and balloons within them to nab the puzzle piece. The only variation in this task across the entire game is in the level geometry. Sometimes you'll need to time your shots with barrel cannons, other times you'll need to jump on a moving trampoline, or you may just have to navigate a couple of close together platforms. The tepid shakeups aren't enough to make bonus rooms enjoyable, and once again, they aren't nearly as fun to seek out as they were in DKC 2. Part of what made them so challenging to find in that game was that they were tucked away behind some out-of-reach ledge, or just out of view of the camera, and you need to toss your partner to reach the barrel. In Returns, you'll often find them without even really looking because of the updated partner system, and the act of entering one doesn't fill me with the same excitement as they did in that game. The reason why completing the bonus rooms is so satisfying in the older titles is that they're so well hidden, and Returns just doesn't have that going for it. If your main objective in Returns was unlocking and beating every single level, you would just have to collect the Kong letters in each level, meaning you could completely ignore the bonus rooms if you wanted to, which is telling. Bonus rooms just feel like they're here because they existed in the last 3 games, and they get stale fast as a result. Speaking of bananas, I immediately noticed an absurd abundance of them in every single level. In Donkey Kong Country, collecting 100 bananas will reward you with a life. In the original, you'd mostly be racking up bananas and gaining extra lives in the bonus rooms, which made sense. In Returns though, bananas are everywhere, to the point where you'll never be low on lives. To make matters worse, the banana tokens that you will also find constantly can be spent in Cranky's cabin, where you buy consumable items and upgrades and the like. There, you can buy 7 lives for 15 tokens, and in the ports, you can get that same amount for even cheaper. 15 tokens is already ridiculously low for how often you find these things. By the time I entered World 3, my total life count never dipped below 40. Honestly, lives might as well not even exist in this game. It just feels like yet another mechanic the developers were afraid to break away from. The wealth of lives and Returns really takes the punch out of the difficulty, since the only real risk involved with dying is being sent back to the most recent checkpoint. This may be perfectly fine with some players, since there are only about 1 to 2 checkpoints per level, and as I said earlier, the levels are pretty lengthy, but dying never really felt like all that much of a hindrance for me, and that lowers the stakes of this adventure considerably. It's hard to dive deep into Returns' levels, since the homogeneity present in their art design and locations, combined with the music being mostly either remixes of familiar tracks or more understated ambient pieces, make them hard for me to remember. Though, there are times where the game subverts your expectations and hits you with an excellent set piece or some continuity between levels. For example, Stormy Shore in World 2 has you evading this giant octopus who brings about a nasty thunderstorm and some dangerous waves. The next level runs with the wave idea, asking you to hide between rocks for safety from the ocean, and moving once you get the opportunity. It's a shame that the final boss of this world isn't even the octopus, as that would have tied the whole thing together nicely, but I suppose it is implied you defeat him in level 5. In the most unceremonious way possible, might I add. Returns is at its best during moments like this, but they don't occur as often as I would have liked. The levels often put up a good challenge, but I consistently found myself appreciating things like the background details and whatnot the most while playing through them, and not anything the level was doing in terms of platforming design. Returns really does just feel like the new Super Mario Bros. Of DKC to me, man. Soundly designed levels that are fun in the moment, but just don't stick with you. I praise the bosses of the SNES trilogy for their incremental improvements between entries, but not a single one of them holds a candle to any of the bosses in Returns. The boss fights are more involved and treated with more gravitas instead of the checkboxes they often felt like in the older games. These bosses demand quick reflexes to dodge attacks and take advantage of openings, and they're quite lengthy as well, which make for really fun endurance tests. The fights always have an audience in the background that cheers you on as you damage your opponent, heightening your adrenaline as you get closer to taking them down. Unfortunately, the final boss is the weakest of the bunch. He does get a cool lead up to him, but he just isn't very exciting to fight, since he feels like a boss I've fought at least 5 times in other Nintendo games. After landing the final blow, Donkey hits him with the moon, and the bananas are returned to their rightful home. Donkey Kong Country Returns is a fine game that just does not appeal to me. I can appreciate the gameplay improvements, larger scope, and grand levels, but it's missing that meditative atmosphere that makes the experience whole. It mostly follows the template created by DKC1, but the ways in which it deviates from it aren't compelling enough to make it something truly unique in my eyes, and the things it leaves behind make me wish I was playing one of the older games. It insists on carrying over elements it has no interest in fleshing out, like bonus rooms and animal buddies, or even elements that no longer make sense, like lives. It fails to establish an identity of its own, destined to live in the shadow of the first game, and even its successor. It is hard for me to fully admire all the good this game accomplishes when I struggle to be interested in what it ultimately is. One thing I've learned about myself is that I tend to value originality in games more than refinements of older ideas. Sometimes the two overlap, but in the case of Returns, I don't feel that is true. Refinements are great, don't get me wrong, but when I look at my all-time favorite games, or the list of games I find myself thinking about most often, they're typically either the firsts in my favorite series, or the ones that shake up conventions the most. Dark Souls, Pikmin, Portal, Hi-Fi Rush, Shadow of the Colossus, and more. These experiences showed me what this medium is capable of through their innovative mechanics, settings, or atmospheres. DKC Returns just can't rival the impact that the first 2 games left on me because of how derivative and annoying it can be. Engaging with its level gimmicks is rarely boring, but I find the memories of my experience fleeting. I understand I'm probably in the minority here, and that's okay. I completely understand why Returns is hailed as one of Nintendo's best platformers, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's undeserving of such praise. Though it may not have clicked with me fully, some of the ways it polishes and expands on the gameplay of the trilogy are great. If Retro could establish a distinct identity in a sequel, up the ante, and improve on what isn't quite working, we could have something truly special in our hands. And sure enough, 2014 saw the release of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Retro's second contribution to the series. It's a game that, in the eyes of some, renders their first effort obsolete. It's often touted as the definitive, best 2D platformer ever made. But is this game truly as ice-shattering as people claim, or have they simply gone bananas? Going into Tropical Freeze, I was honestly kind of nervous. I had only ever played it once years ago, and revisiting Returns just to unexpectedly find I didn't care for it all that much had me worried. Was my memory serving me poorly, and the game isn't as distinct as I thought it was? Or are the things people appreciate this game for at odds with what I enjoy about DKC? Fortunately, it did not take much time for Tropical Freeze to quell those anxieties. This game is constantly bouncing from fresh idea to fresh idea, striking locale to striking locale, all while maintaining an engaging gameplay experience with each passing minute. While it isn't without its flaws, I believe it to be a monumental improvement on its predecessor, and one of the high points in Donkey Kong's history. Donkey Kong and Company are celebrating Donkey's birthday in their treehouse when suddenly, a snowflake puts out his candle, which clues the Kongs in that something is off. A crew of Arctic animal Vikings called the Snowmads engulfs DK Island in a snowstorm, I guess in the pursuit of more territory? This storm launches the party onto a nearby island, and they must make their way back to their home save it from the clutches of the Snowmads, and restore it to its former glory. I like this setup much more than Returns, since the Snowmads are immediately more imposing and interesting enemies than the Tiki Tribe ever was, and it isn't a straight up rehash of an older premise. It also allows for many different level settings, since the adventure spans multiple islands. A common criticism of games like DKC 1 and 2 are that you have to suspend your disbelief a bit for some of these levels to make sense contextually. I'll even admit it's a little odd that there's a winter wonderland right next door to a dreary oil factory on a tropical island. But Tropical Freeze is able to sidestep this issue, and it allows the game to go places never before seen in this series. World 1 does start out on the more basic side, being this kind of rainforesty isle, but it is set apart by the focus on wreckage. All throughout these levels, you'll see crashed planes and dismantled machinery, often integrated directly into the platforming. It's a refreshing spin on a familiar trope, and by the third level, I was enjoying myself immensely. In addition to that first world, Tropical Freeze takes you to a quaint mountaintop village inspired by areas of Switzerland, a lively savanna, a beachy archipelago, a jungle full of fruit, and a frozen-over DK island. Even the more rote motifs are made interesting with some extra ideas thrown in. Every single level is dripping with style and atmosphere, thanks to just how much detail is present. Donkey Kong Country has always been great at establishing a setting and contextualizing the platforming, but Tropical Freeze takes it to a whole new level. There is not a single abstract platform inexplicably floating above the stage. They always make sense within the setting and the background elements. So much care and consideration was put into every minute portion of the levels, and it contributes massively to the experience. Before we get too deep into the levels, let's talk about what Tropical Freeze changes from Returns mechanically. Donkey and Diddy Kong function exactly how they did in Returns, but there are two new sidekick characters in Tropical Freeze, Dixie Kong and Cranky Kong. Dixie brings her hair twirl from the SNES with her, though it works differently in Tropical Freeze. Instead of a continuous slow glide, it lets you glide forward slightly and then propels you into the air. I'd liken it to a less powerful spin jump from Super Mario Galaxy. This move has a variety of applications, and it can often be the difference between life and death. The glide move that Diddy offers just isn't as powerful as Dixie's hair twirl, and between all the partners, Dixie will be the clear choice for most players. However, I love using Cranky Kong. He uses his cane as a pogo stick, allowing for greater jump height and building up tons of speed. With Cranky, you can bounce directly on spikes, various enemies, and other hazards you couldn't jump on otherwise. So, if you can master the timing and control of Cranky, he can be easily the best partner the series has on offer. I'm not quite at that level, but the impossibly high skill ceiling he presents encourages me to use him as much as I can, and I always have fun with that. Another feature new to Tropical Freeze is the screen nuke. Collecting 100 bananas fills up a meter, and what happens when you activate it depends on what partner you have. All the enemies on screen will be replaced by 1-up balloons, banana tokens, or in the case of Dixie, bonus hearts that stack on your existing ones. Dixie's ability is really the only useful one, particularly when it comes to tough boss fights. I never find myself in situations in the regular levels where I could use a screen nuke, and lives and banana tokens are abundant enough as is. As a result, I forget this feature even exists until I enter a boss arena. It's a fine addition that I just don't get much use out of. On the whole, I find Tropical Freeze much easier than Returns, and it's definitely the easiest game in the series. Pretty much everything I said about Returns regarding the abundance of bananas and lives and whatnot applies here, but even worse. Despite not stepping foot in Funky's shop once, I cleared World 2 with 80 lives, and that was me just casually strolling through these levels, occasionally entering a bonus room or two. I'd be lying if I said I didn't wish it was a little more challenging, but overall, I'm less bothered by the difficulty here than I was in Returns, because Tropical Freeze largely commits to and advances what Returns wanted to go for. Tropical Freeze has the most spectacular, varied, and engaging levels I've ever seen in a 2D platformer, bar none. Canopy Chaos is the first truly great level the game offers. Its fusion of nature and machinery gives it a distinct flavor, and the confident, carefree vibe of the music cemented it as an early favorite. There's actually a secret exit in this level that unlocks another level you couldn't access otherwise, Busted Bayou, one of the most gorgeous levels in this series. The foreground consists entirely of an inky black silhouette, while the background contrasts it with a vibrant green. The music here is like a modern DK Island swing, where a wide assortment of instruments takes center stage for portions of the song, culminating in a genuinely awe-inspiring saxophone climax. You're going to hear me praise the soundtrack a lot, and that is due to the fact that David Wise returned to Donkey Kong Country with Tropical Freeze. It had been nearly 2 decades since he was last involved with a DKC game, and in that time, many of his compositions had cemented themselves as legendary pieces of video game music. When Wise's involvement with Tropical Freeze was confirmed, it felt like the world rejoiced. The last soundtrack he made for a DKC game was for a console with a sound chip from the early 90s, so hearing what he was capable of with modern hardware was a tantalizing prospect. And the final product proved to be well worth the wait. We're past the days of predictable remixes of classic tracks and music that doesn't fully match the established tone of the series. David Wise fully takes advantage of the time that has passed, the hardware advancements, the graphical shift, and 20 years of hindsight. The sound of Donkey Kong Country has finally matured. The aforementioned Mountaintop Village is probably my favorite world in this game, and one of the best bunches of levels the series has. It starts with Windmill Hills, placing you right in the midst of the village, allowing you to take in the sights and sounds. The main harmonica melody here is soothing as hell. It fits the region like a glove. Then there's Mountain Mania, marking the return of Rambi. He is a lot more fun to use in Tropical Freeze, because it feels like these levels utilize his abilities more than in Returns, and this one is a prime example. Autumn Hill has you jumping across these beautiful falling leaves and getting boosted into the air by instruments in the background. There's an awesome set piece at the end of the stage where you're inside of a horn, and these gusts of wind propel you up it. They're synced with the music, and you feel the impact of the wind thanks to the sound design. After that comes quite possibly the best minecart level in the entire series in Sawmill Thrill. You start out by dodging all these saw blades and jumping over cut logs, and then a giant saw blade trails you, creating the platforms you need to jump to in the process, similar to Ripsaw Rage from DKC 3. It is the pinnacle of the frenetic platforming of the minecart stages. Alpine Incline reminds me of Red Hot Ride from DKC 2 when it comes to its main gimmick, but the setting lends it a much calmer atmosphere. It's a bit of a reprieve from the previous level. Then, you enter Wing Ding, and you get hit with the catchiest damn song yet. I'm honestly astonished people don't talk about this level very often. That opening riff alone solidified it as one of the best levels yet, and that's not even mentioning how fun it is to actually platform through. The game maintains its hot streak into World 3, beginning with what is hands down my favorite level in the game, and a contender for my favorite in the entire series, Grassland Groove. You enter the level with a gorgeous assortment of African instruments welcoming you, and you immediately get a feel for the jovial energy of this place with the dancing trees. Then, the chorus hits, which made me want to stay here forever. Every element of this stage is synced to the music, giving platforming this rhythmic satisfaction that has always been present in DKC, but never quite at the forefront like it is here. The music changes dynamically as you progress too, keeping the stage engaging throughout. There's a section where the song completely switches, and you'll need to jump across these giraffe heads. This section embodies everything I've said about the flow of platforming. Just see for yourself. The level concludes with a more open segment, allowing for a full view of the sun setting over the savannah, complete with fireworks lighting the sky, and the two songs from each section of the level converging to create something beyond words. Yeah, now that I say all of this, Grassland Groove is Donkey Kong Country's best level for sure. That isn't to say the rest of the Savannah levels are bad either. This tornado level a bit later on has one of the coolest set pieces I've ever seen in a platformer, and Rambi once again sees his abilities adequately tested. The very next level places you in that very same Savannah from Grassland Groove, though this time, it is inundated with flames. That once cheerful, bustling savannah is hardly recognizable now. This level's music is a true work of genius too. It manages to feel hopeless, while also conveying the high stakes of the situation. One detail I love is that when the flute takes center stage, it often ends with these erratic notes that imply random breaths blown into it, like the person playing it is struggling to breathe. Thus, the song could be interpreted as the savannah's last breaths as it is overtaken by the fire. Tropical Freeze has a ton of lower key music like Scorchin' Torch that are just as much of highlights as the more extravagant tunes of Grassland Groove and Busted Bayou. There's a stunning underwater silhouette level in the beach world with music that really captures the wonder of the ocean floor. Later on, the octopus from Returns makes an appearance, and you would have never guessed just how intense the encounter would get going off the beginning music. The chase sequence in the latter half of this level features a remix of Lockjaw's Saga from DKC 2, one of the many references to that game. I'm much more accepting of the remixes in Tropical Freeze, since they're used sparingly when compared to Returns, and feel like they're included with purpose. They aren't here to replace original tracks, they're used to complement and enhance them. On the whole, Seabreeze Cove is a great world, and definitely one of the best water-themed worlds in any 2D platformer I've ever played. However, I would still cite it as my least favorite in the game, just because I'm not as big a fan of this gameplay style compared to the fast-paced action platforming of the other worlds. Thankfully, Juicy Jungle brings us back on track with one of the most memorable locations in the series. This world revolves around a fruit harvesting facility, and it throws a mixture of challenges at you, all while taking you through the entire process of gathering the fruit, extracting the juice, and freezing it as you progress. It's an excellent world, one that completely understands and captures the appeal of Donkey Kong Country on all fronts. Tropical Freeze ends off with a revisitation of DK Island, but it has undergone substantial changes since we last saw it. The Snowmads and their influence have warped the island almost beyond recognition. Ancient structures were unable to withstand the change in climate. The cliffs are stuck in a perpetual blizzard with little access to sunlight, and even the bat from the rocket level in Returns can be seen frozen in a block of ice at one point. The levels here are consistently amazing too. You've got the silhouette level where you're platforming against an avalanche, the relaxing snowy forest, the volcano you have to dash through with Rambi, and this inventive electricity stage based off Return's factory area. Tropical Freeze's DK Island is a genuinely powerful world to cap off an incredible game. So imagine how I felt when I realized that Tropical Freeze not only didn't improve on Returns' bonus rooms, but actually made them worse. They maintain the structure of Returns, where you collect bananas and whatnot within 30 seconds. They're still just as easy to find too, so there isn't any additional satisfaction from uncovering a well-hidden secret. And yet, I feel that the layouts that are recycled across the game for these bonus rooms are even less complex and engaging than the ones in Returns, so I grew tired of them even quicker. Furthermore, the backgrounds of these rooms don't even change to coincide with the world theme like in Returns, instead opting for this stale temple aesthetic for every single room in the game. The otherwise extremely high quality of Tropical Freeze makes this oversight extremely baffling. Though, Tropical Freeze makes an addition that satiates my desire to comb through these levels for secrets, the hidden exits. These exits will unlock new levels on the world map when taken, and they can be pretty tough to find at times. They remind me of the bonus rooms in DKC 2, since you often need to meet certain conditions to take advantage of them. In this one, I found the secret exit, but I couldn't use it because I didn't have a partner. They almost make up for the lackluster bonus rooms. Almost, not fully. Conversely, Tropical Freeze does improve on the boss design from Returns. These are some of the toughest bosses I've faced in a 2D platformer, but I really appreciate that. Pompey the Sea Lion is a great introductory boss with some exceptional hard rock backing the battle. Scowl ups the intensity by demanding more precision and timing. The three monkeys fully realize the idea behind the crab boss from Returns, and the Bashmaster puts up one hell of a fight. The only boss I'm not big on is the pufferfish, Fugu. He isn't super challenging, and he can take a while to go down, leaving you just kind of swimming around waiting for an opening most of that time. The final boss is a pretty cool fight too, though I do have some issues with him as well. He has this one attack deep into the fight that will almost certainly kill you if you haven't seen it before. I also feel that the fight goes on a little longer than it maybe should, and dying right at the home stretch can be frustrating. He's still leagues better than the final boss in Returns though, much more climactic, and the endurance test does create tension. Defeating him launches him out of the ship on top of DK Island, splitting it in two and breaking the curse placed on the land. The snow begins to thaw, returning the island to its original state, and the Kongs live happily ever after. Perhaps the most meaningful praise I can offer Tropical Freeze is that it impressed me when it felt like the series no longer could. This game is a true labor of love born from a desire to push the series forward, and I can feel that passion in every single moment while playing. It may not evolve every lacking area of Returns, but it positively nailed the most important ones. Every single level is a banger of the highest caliber. The soundtrack is one of the very best video games have to offer, and it succeeds in creating a distinct identity. While I do believe it falters in some areas when compared to DKC 2, it is unquestionably the best entry in this series since that game, and I absolutely adore it. Retro Studios went through a period of turbulence after Tropical Freeze's release. They had pitched a couple of games to Nintendo, none of which were greenlit. There was a game that they had been working on for a time that to this day has not been announced. In early 2019, development of Metroid Prime 4 was shifted over to Retro Studios, which became their primary focus. Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze each received ports to the Nintendo Switch, but it has been over a decade since the release of a brand new game. With that in mind, it seems that a sequel to Tropical Freeze is out of the question, leaving us forever wondering what a modern Retro Studios trilogy would have looked like in the end. It appears as though we have entered a second era of dormancy for the series. But as much as I would be thrilled to see a new entry, I don't think they could have capped off the Country Revival era with a better game than Tropical Freeze. From the 90s up to the 2010s, Rareware and Retro Studios had created an incredible lineup of titles that solidified the gritty gorilla as a gaming icon for generations. Donkey Kong Country revitalized the character, transforming his very identity and revamping the associated gameplay, tying the whole experience together with a rich atmosphere and a superb soundtrack. Donkey Kong Country 2 improved on every element of its predecessor, introducing new gameplay mechanics and a darker setting to create the greatest 2D platformer I have ever played. DKC 3 switched things up to mixed results, but the final product is an undeniably excellent platformer that is worth your time. Returns successfully translated the core elements of Donkey Kong Country for the modern era, but failed to fully justify its existence, relying far too much on past conventions and motifs, while hesitating to commit to its new direction. Tropical Freeze kept what was great about Returns intact and fleshed out the areas it was lacking in, forming a unique identity for itself and setting a high bar for future entries in the series. For a long time, I believed that I did not enjoy 2D platformers, especially when compared to other genres of games. There was something about the fundamental gameplay, combined with the lack of a compelling setting or style, that just put me off the ones I played. But things have since changed, and I attribute that shift in perspective to Donkey Kong Country. Though the challenging and engaging platforming itself is a lot of fun, what keeps me coming back to these games like clockwork is the atmosphere. Through its mix of realistic and zany environments, and in the case of the SNES games, 3D models with 16-bit presentation, it is able to craft a powerful atmosphere unrivaled by games of its time, and even many these days. I love what Retro Studios was able to accomplish with Tropical Freeze, but the style of the original trilogy is at the forefront of those games, and it will forever be timeless. Retro could come out with the biggest, boldest, catchiest Donkey Kong Country game yet, and I think I would still find myself coming back to DKC 2 for that reason. These are the levels I lose myself in. The songs that etch their every note into the circuitry of my brain, the secrets I delighted uncovering, and the challenges my hands crave to repeat. DKC 2 may be the peak of the franchise to me, but the ways in which it appeals to me apply to every game in the series to some extent. Whether I want to soak in the gorgeous vistas of Donkey Kong Country 1, hum along to the eccentric tunes of DKC 3, or take on Tropical Freeze's assortment of punishing bosses, there will always be a reason to return to each and every entry. And it's that consistency that makes Donkey Kong Country one of the best series in gaming. That's it from me. Thanks for watching.